Joining us right now is another person that we do love because he is out there, as we mentioned earlier in the hour. After 9/11, so many of us said we know that there are good Muslims out there. There are good people who practice the faith of Islam, and we want to hear those voices talk about the beauty of the religion and also condemn those who do evil in its name. Because I know if people were doing evil in the name of my religion, I would be out there trying to condemn it as much as I could, because it's what we're supposed to do as good believers in our God. And Dr. Zuhdi Jasser is that man. He is the one who has been such a stalwart voice out there, and we so appreciate him being here. Dr. Jasser, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's always great to be with you guys, and thanks for the kind words. If there ever was a time we need to put the fire under the feet of Muslims to wake up around the world, and especially in America, it's now.
And, of course, you're the founder of American Islamic Forum for Democracy, and your book, A Battle for the Soul of Islam, An American Muslim's Patriots Fight to Save His Faith, is a must-read for anyone who really wants to understand the faith and about what the conflicts of being an American and trying to send the message that you send. I want to focus on what's going on in the Middle East because these are very perilous times. Everyone is hearing about ISIS, of course, and their march through Iraq. They call themselves ISIS or ISIL, the Islamic State of Iraq in the Levant or Syria. You are a native Syrian. Can you tell me the distinction, first of all? What is the Levant? Explain this for us.
Well, the reason they're ISIS is the last S is actually Sham. Damascus is the old capital of what used to be a Sham, which was the Levant, which is the area that encompasses Syria and Iraq, especially, and into Lebanon. And basically now you see a struggle where ISIS, which was fertilized and fueled by the Assad regime, even though they are his enemy on the battlefield, he has used the jihadists as a foil in which to decimate in a genocidal fashion the majority of Sunnis in Syria. And that monstrous experiment of his has caused the radicalization of the Syrian communities, especially, obviously, the Islamists, and they've spread into Iraq. And they had a long vision to bring back the Caliphate. And, this is about ISIS is a gnat in the problem, in that the bigger problem is the ideology of the Islamic State or Islamism. And you see these ideologies cropping up not only in ISIS, but in Boko Haram in Nigeria. You see it in the Taliban. You see it in Saudi Arabia with the Wahhabis. I mean, the OIC is basically a neo-caliphate, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. So I hope Americans can put the dots together and say that ISIS is, if we look at ISIS just as the problem out of Syria, which it is, a failed Syrian policy, the bigger policy is we haven't had a president with a vision of how to counter the Islamic State ideology.
And I definitely want to get into your opinion about how Barack Obama has mishandled this situation. But first, just for clarity, we've seen this week that ISIS has declared that region now their caliphate. Can you explain what that means and why that's a problem?
Well, the caliphate, the last time there was one was the Ottomans. The Turks claimed that they had a caliphate, and they did have one for over 400 years. It's basically the seat of what is felt the caliph in Arabic means basically the representative of the Islamic tradition and law on the earth of the Prophet Muhammad. And basically that has to have the constituency of the global Islamic Ummah, or the community or state, if you will. ISIS will never have that. But the bigger issue is, the Islamist ideology, the OIC exists, so they want to put their foot down and say we have a caliphate. And there are many other organizations competing to do the same thing. Even in the West, you have Hizb ut-Tahrir, which claims they want to bring back the caliphate and include even Europe into it.
Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, I know that there are some very, very brave men who fought alongside our American troops there in Iraq. They risked a lot to help bring democracy to Iraq and try to build a nation there. And they feel betrayed by the American government. They feel betrayed by the Obama administration because of the way we left there, and now they're sitting ducks. What should Barack Obama do right now, if he can do anything for that matter?
Well, you're 100% right. They do feel betrayed because, as Victor Davis Hanson talked about in National Review last week, you can never really go in and turn over a dictatorship without a plan for an extended occupation. Korea is an example, Germany and others. In order to maintain stability, these governments, autocrats, have been pressure cookers for radicalism, and the last thing they've ever allowed to be fueled were moderate liberal movements. So if that's going to happen, they need chaperoning, and for the chaperones to leave, we are betraying them. And the policy is that we should have had from the beginning, and our organization, the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, has a liberty doctrine belief that we have a Muslim Liberty Project that believes that the Middle East and the Muslim majority countries can have a third pathway away from the secular fascists of Mubarak and Sadat and Saddam Hussein or Assad, and away from the theocrats that are trying to fill that vacuum now, and that Muslims don't have to be sentenced to that death match between those two evils, but rather, like the West, go through a reformation and enlightenment and have a third pathway of liberty, and that needs leadership of the free world. If we don't back the green movements like we did in Iran, where we dropped them like a hot potato, or back the opportunities of the Arab awakening, you're going to see those vacuums filled by the most evil movements, which are the Islamists, and we're seeing that come to fruition today.
Christian Blatt alongside Larry O'Connor, filling in for Dennis Miller on the Dennis Miller Show, talking to Zuhdi Jasser. And Dr. Jasser, we want to kind of shift the topic a little bit. We wanted to talk about these Israeli teenagers, this terrible story. Talk a little bit about the thoughts around who's responsible and what we're already seeing in form of retaliation from the Israeli government.
Well, you know, I'm disappointed not only in our government but in somewhat the media for the lack of coverage of this. The Jewish state, Israel, has been the canary in the coal mine for generations in dealing with radical Islam. These three boys were killed because they were Jewish, not because they were Israeli. It was a Jewish, anti-Jewish hate crime, and Hamas's ideology. You heard them today. They're saying that the gates of hell will open up, and to see Abbas, so-called, form a coalition with them, as Netanyahu said, was proof positive that he is not even a moderate and that he's just trying to consolidate some kind of fictitious base. And until Hamas condemns their ideology, their own ideology, and their ideology disappears, they are what their origins are, which is a byproduct of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamist anti-Western, anti-freedom movement. And these three young boys are martyrs for freedom, and that's really why they were killed. And no doubt, I think it'll come out that it was Hamas.
Yeah, and then to spin it back to President Obama and John Kerry's State Department, I mean, their statement that they really, first of all, the president said nothing about these young boys. One of them, by the way, has dual citizenship with the United States. The president made no public statement during the entire gut-wrenching time where they were trying to find and free these three boys. Finally, a statement is released after they were discovered in a shallow grave. And in his statement, he asked for restraint on both sides, from the Palestinians and from the Israelis. That kind of equivocation, obviously it enrages the people of Israel, but what message does that send to Hamas? What message does that send to the Muslims in that area?
It sends the message that we buy into their absurd moral equivalency, that somehow this narrative, and this is the problem with the president's entire lack of vision, is that their narrative is that terrorism is some kind of grievance ideology. It's just a problem of violence, and they bought into basically the addiction of a majority of the Muslim community, which is that, you know, it's sort of like the families that are addicted to drugs, and they say, well, the violence that our kids are getting killed, if we don't know what the problem is, we just have to start the violence. They don't admit that it's the drugs. Well, the gateway drug for Hamas and ISIS and all these groups is political Islam and the supremacy of it. And the president doesn't want to deal with that because of political correctness and his collectivist mindset and the way he approaches politics. So as a result, he basically surrenders that and says it's about violence, and both sides are equally at fault, when in fact this is a once in a millennial ideological conflict between liberty and theocracy again.
Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, I thank you for that passionate response, and I hope that it's being heard by like-minded people that can understand that this president really is making all of the wrong moves when it comes to dealing with the Arab Street, especially considering we were told that he would be the godsend to the Middle East and make America so popular there in that area. Here we are in the month of Ramadan. I know that's very important to Muslims around the world, and it's also, you know, we're right before Independence Day here in America, so you get to sort of celebrate not just your religious month, but also a very important date in our nation's history. I want to ask you a personal question, if I could. Are you alone? Are you feeling alone, or are you feeling like more people, more Muslims, American Muslims, are coming to you and saying, "Thank you, I want to be a part of this"?
I have to tell you, behind the scenes, we are not alone. Because of what's happening in Syria, because of what's happening in Iraq, so many Muslims are coming to us and saying, Zuhdi, you know, your group had it right, your Liberty Project. We need a third pathway away from the old tribal desert rat dictators or monarchs and away from the theocrats. But the problem is the educational curve is so steep. Many in our community were not educated in Jeffersonian religious liberty, and that takes a while. While I feel alone when it comes to media and our government, they don't want to hear it. They just want a quick fix for next week and to go on to the next problem and continue their whack-a-mole program. And, you know, when I served in the Navy, America had a long vision for why my family came here was for freedom and liberty. And as we come to July 4th, and, you know, Ramadan's about reflection and self-renewal and repair, and, you know, many in our Muslim communities are looking for knowing the fact that this is our problem and we got to fix it, but we have to give them platforms and not pretend they don't exist.
Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, his group, by the way, once again, that you need to bookmark, you need to follow, you need to make sure that you support, if you can, the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. It's nice to see Islam and democracy in the same title. I am so glad always to talk to you, and I hope that your voice continues to be a loud one on behalf of American Muslims who are on the right side of this issue. I wish you a peaceful Ramadan and a very happy Independence Day, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser.
Well, God bless you and Christian and Dennis, and thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
You betcha.
Always happy to have you, Dr. Jasser. And, of course, there's always worth mentioning Dr. Jasser's book, A Battle for the Soul of Islam, and American Muslim Patriots Fight to Save His Faith.
I'm Larry O'Connor alongside Christian Blatt, and you're listening to The Dennis Miller Show.